So, good evening, friends. Thank you for joining today's masterclass. As we every time say, it is every time an addition to our knowledge. So, Dr. Manju Jilla's masterclass has really been an value add for everybody who has been attending regularly. Also, it has a lot of following on the YouTube channel, which we host as IVF Virtual Academy. More importantly, if you have this PDF version of this invite, you can see all her lectures being there with the topic and active links of YouTube. So this we will continue for sure. I am Dr. Amit Borse. I head the marketing of IVA. It is a division of MCure Pharmaceuticals Limited. We are on a mission to nurture and support 28 days. Programming 28 is a scientific theme for the year and is based on the concept of managing an ovarian cycles with different gonadotropins, analogs, and hormones. Materna is our prime brand and is an epitome of quality and success. We are very proud and privileged to have Dr. Manju Jilla ma'am always with us. And this time we have brought in a topic of male infertility, genetic causes, and management of fertilization failure. So indeed a very important topic, ma'am. Thank you for taking this up and it is all over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Amit. Can you see my slides?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I thank MCure Pharmaceutical and Dr. Amit for being very active in making me read, make presentations, and give my talks to all those who need them really. I really thank you. Otherwise, I think I wouldn't have done all this. Thanks a lot, Dr. Amit and MCure Pharmaceutical. Now, today's topic is something which is sort of a burning topic. We have always been thinking that a huge chunk of infertility is unexplained. But as the human genome, its activities are getting unraveled, more and more very fine genetic techniques are, being recruited in managing or diagnosing infertility. More and more infertility causes are being diagnosed, and the cause is being found in the sperms or in the oocytes as some single gene disorders about which we really had no knowledge. The search has not ended, and my entire intention of this topic is all of us as clinicians get patients with minor male infertility or a severe male infertility or just a failure of fertilization after doing ICSI or IVF. So let us not just throw away these patients, but collaborate with some genetic center, get some of their genetic tests done. And as we have more and more knowledge of the genetic makeup of these men, probably we will be able to find out more genes responsible for male infertility. Now, the gene expression analysis studies done in mice show that 2,300 genes are active in the testis or in the male germline. And since this mice or the mouse is a male model or model for the humans also, we feel that similar type of genes or that many genes, more than 2,000 genes would be active in the human testes also. And any mutation, maybe a point mutation or a copy number variation in these genes would likely be a cause of male infertility. As on today, because we lack the knowledge, we put it as idiopathic male infertility. Now, how were these genes diagnosed? As clinicians, we must know the methods of diagnosing our genes. Previously, if there was a single type of a phenotype, for example, a sperm without the acrosomic cap. So hundreds of these patients, their DNA were analyzed. It was seen that they had a specific defect on a gene on chromosome number 7, which was called as the CVABD gene. And similarly, that gene was knocked out in a mouse and found whether it produces similar phenotypic effects. But this method is very tedious. It has not helped us in finding many genetic variations as a cause of male infertility, oligoastheno or teratospermia. Then came a new method If we go into the history of genetics, we know that in the early 90s, we had just one method of knowing the genome, that is through karyotype. We could, all that we could see is the 24 chromosomes. That is the 20, or 23 pairs of autosomes and a sex chromosome. Later on, in the late 90s, we got polymerase chain reaction as one of the methods of diagnosing a single gene disorder when the gene is known. Then we got the Sanger sequencing, where we could actually sequence the code, the DNA code, in the polymerase chain reaction DNA copies which we got. And once we knew that the DNA can be diagnosed or analyzed because they are very faithful. Adenine will always combine with thymine, cytosine will always combine with guanine. Then came the era of microarray, where known genes were put on a slide and the patient's genes were copied, multiple copies of patient's genes were made, they were labeled and hybridized on the slide, and then the slide would tell us which gene has got more copies and which have got less copies, showing us deletions or duplications. Even this in oligospermic males did not help us much. Not many genes were diagnosed by this technique of microarray or by the technique of single nucleotide polymorphism. What is that? That is, even if one nucleotide is different in an oligospermic male, it will not form a union with the normal type of a gene, and that is known as SNP. And SNPs are always seen, or where we compare a normal sperm male genetic material with a abnormal sperm male's genetic material. Soon in the 2000s, because we got Sanger sequencing and the method of copying our genes or a polymerase chain reaction, what happened is the many countries came together and the human genome was first found out. That is, we have around 25,000 genes, and all these genes were sequenced. Their variations were sequenced, and this information was fed to the computer. What we want to tell you is that when the genome was sequenced, it was found that 98% of our genome, we do not know what it is doing there. Only 2% of the entire DNA code is responsible for producing mRNA, which produce proteins. Rest of the DNA, at that time they called it as a junk DNA, and 2% only is called as a DNA which is producing mRNA and proteins. So when we say today we want an exome sequencing, we are actually doing a sequencing only of this 2% DNA, which is responsible for producing specific proteins in the human body. But the whole genome sequencing is the sequencing of the entire genome genetic code of a human being, the knowledge of which we do not have. It does produce mRNA, but these mRNA are not translated into proteins. There are a lot of microRNAs which these non-coding areas are producing, and probably they have some regulatory functions in our genome. But the good part is that when we know nothing, supposing we have an oligospermic man, his karyotype is normal, he has no Y microdeletion, then we say, then what? What is the answer to his problem? We can just get his whole exome sequenced and know which all genetic material or which all genes are having some different combinations as compared to the normal. And this can be put as a bioinformatic information. And as we get more and more patients with oligospermia having the similar gene, then more studies can be done, and this gene can be labeled as a cause of oligospermia. So as clinicians, we must try to find out whether our oligospermic males are having any genetic problem. Whatever it is, that should be recorded so that the next generation will have a better diagnostic modality. So what we said, how can we diagnose these genetic problems in the males is, at least if there is a similar phenotype in at least 10 patients, we can do their genetic evaluation, look at the common genes which look abnormal and knock them out in an animal study and see if that works. Only one gene has been identified in that, that is the CABBD gene. Then if we have families with similar phenotype, we have many people in that family who have, who have oligospermia. Then we can do a genetic evaluation of those families and find out whether they have some similar abnormal gene. But the maximum information which we have got about the genes responsible for oligoasthenoteratospermia is from large consanguineous families. We know that in the Middle Eastern countries, especially in Saudi Arabia, consanguinity is as high as 50%. And they also have a large load of male infertility. And being a wealthy country, many of them don't mind doing their whole genome, whole exome sequencing. And so many genes have been identified, the recessive genes responsible for oligoastheno and teratospermia. So what is known as on today, I will discuss. A lot more is going to come with a collaboration between the clinicians and the genetic laboratories. So these are the genes that have been found as on today responsible for azoospermia, asthenospermia, total fertilization failure, non-obstructive azoospermia, and oligoasthenoteratospermia. So this is a huge list of almost 50 to 60 genes which have been confirmed as a cause of these specific problems. And when we get a patient of oligospermia, asthenospermia, there is no point in doing all the genes to be tested. What we can do is first test them for the specific gene, like a person with globozoospermia. Just get him tested for the SPATA16 or the DPY19L2. Just two genes. If they are absent, then let us do his whole exome sequencing and keep a record of it. So if the known gene is not seen in that person, then it is our duty to keep his entire exome sequenced in order to know whether we can add to the information of this science. Well, as on today, we only look at patients who have a poor semen analysis report and think of exposing them to genetic tests. But it may also be that normospermic men or men who are fathering, when the wife becomes pregnant, they are repeatedly having early abortions, or some abnormal babies may also be harboring some genetic problem in their sperms. Nowadays, even single sperm analysis, RNA analysis, and then the DNA analysis is possible. And we are going to be bombarded with lots of information regarding the male infertility, genetic problems of male infertility. So as on today, our flow chart goes as we take a history, we look at the semen analysis. If it is showing azoospermia, we do a serum FSH. If serum FSH is less than 7, we know it is an obstructive azoospermia. And the most common cause of obstructive azoospermia is congenital bilateral absence of vas deferens, which is called as a CFTR gene mutation, a gene on chromosome number 7, where the copy number variation is there. It is also seen that there are some patients where they do have bilateral absence of vas, but they have a proper CFTR gene. So one more mutation has been found in the ADGRG2. That is it is a gene for the G protein receptor on the surface of all our cells. And this mutation also causes congenital bilateral absence of vas deferens. Maybe as we go on analyzing, we may get some more genes responsible for genetic cause of obstructive azoospermia. We all know obstructive azoospermia is very, very treatable. That is by just doing a testicular sperm or epididymal sperm aspiration and ICSI, these men can father their own genetic child. The only thing is this gene can be carried forward in the next generation. So this genetic counseling becomes important when we are dealing with cases of obstructive azoospermia. The non-obstructive azoospermia, where spermatogenesis itself has failed, where testes are not producing sperms. Usually the testes are small in size, hard in their texture, and FSH is often above 14, 15. The higher it is, the lesser is the chance of finding sperms. But even in 50% of patients with non-obstructive azoospermia, with high FSH, with small testicular size, microTC, that is looking at the dilated the membranes, the dilated uh, membranes or the dilated tubules inside the testes. When these are picked up and they are actually milked under the microscope in the ICSI laboratory or in the IVF laboratory, 50% of them will show us presence of spermatogonia, and these sperms can be used for ICSI. But before we do anything, when we find that FSH is high, the first thing that should be done, the first genetic test, is a karyotype. And a common karyotype abnormality seen in almost, if karyotype is abnormal and it's a non-obstructive azoospermia, the most common karyotype abnormality is a Klinefelter syndrome, that is XXY. And if karyotype is normal, the other karyotypic abnormalities that can be found are balanced translocations in the autosomal chromosomes. These translocations can be reciprocal or Robertsonian. We will discuss about them in the coming slides, but let us follow this flow chart. If karyotype comes normal, then here we can see if karyotype comes normal, then we look at Y microdeletion. The Y chromosome is a very, very important chromosome, and it has got many important genes responsible for the specific functions that occur during spermatogenesis. And on the Q arm of the Y chromosome, we have certain factors or certain important genes. So those areas in the Q arm are called as azoospermia factor A, B, and C. Now, if we find nothing in this AZF, A, B, C, then we should do a entire gene screening for non-syndromic male infertility. As on today, whatever genes are available, those can be diagnosed. And if they are not found, new ones can be considered as to be the cause of non-obstructive azoospermia. Now, if we find the sperm count to be less than 5 million, most of these patients, and I would say all of these patients should be advised a karyotype. Many times when we get a autosomal balanced translocation in these patients, and this is a reciprocal translocation rather than a Robertsonian translocation. Besides that, if we see certain abnormalities in the morphology of the sperm, like globozoospermia, macrozoospermia, multiple morphological abnormalities in the sperm flagellae, or only asthenospermia, many of these single genes have been diagnosed. As I told you, the recessive genes, which are seen because of lot of consanguineous families, these have been recently diagnosed, and they should be a part of our armamentarium in guiding patients when the semen shows clearly this type of a teratospermic picture. So let us look at what we find on a karyotype. This is a karyotype which is showing you a male with 2 X chromosomes, which is Klinefelter syndrome, where commonly they present with azoospermia, but we do get spermatogenesis and we get sperms with microTC, and these sperms can be used in by ICSI or in the ICSI technique to allow this man to father a baby. And if a baby is born, very often these sperms do not have chromosomal abnormalities. Majority of the babies born to Klinefelter syndrome fathers are usually normal. Now here we see a reciprocal translocation where a part of chromosome number 4 is gone and stuck to a part of chromosome number 11. Often men with reciprocal translocation will show a semen report of oligospermia or even normospermia, depending upon the dose of genetic material which is lost in this process of reciprocal translocation. Now, this is a case of Robertsonian translocation where the acrosomic chromosome number 21 is sitting on the head of the acrosomic chromosome number 13. Most common abnormality seen in the semen analysis of these patients is severe oligospermia and not azoospermia. Here we see inversion 9, in this where the P11Q13, there is an inversion in chromosome number 9. Very rarely seminogram shows defects in these type of patients, but that should be considered. And when we are going to use sperms of these patients for ICSI, we have to tell them the chances of failure of formation of a blastocyst, failure of implantation, and early abortion. And we can also give them they can take a choice of going in for a PGD and transferring the embryos which are absolutely chromosomally healthy. We can say a PGS. I said that the Y chromosome is a very important chromosome in determining whether the embryo will become a male or not, and also in maintaining his spermatogenesis throughout life. So let us understand the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome it's a small acrosomic chromosome that's got a very small P arm and a large Q arm. On the P arm and at the end, that is at the top of the P arm and at the end of the Q arm, you can see the green areas. These are called as the pseudo autosomal regions, that is called as PAR1 and PAR2. They are so called because they harbor many genes responsible for autosomic functions. And these pseudo-autosomal regions, when we know that these chromosomes pair during meiosis, all our chromosomes, 1, 2, 3, all numbers will pair with each other during meiosis. And during meiosis, there will also be exchange of genetic material between the two pairs of chromosome. Like some part of chromosome 1, the first chromosome will go to the second part and the genetic exchange will go on. So between the X and Y chromosome, it is only the PAR1 and PAR2 which will pair up, and there will be exchange of genetic material during meiosis. And that is how evolution takes place. This is the part of pars. But if this this genetic exchange doesn't happen properly, very often this leads to production of an embryo with Klinefelter syndrome. So as a man ages, the PAR1, PAR2 union of the X and Y chromosome during meiosis is weak, and that leads to children born with Klinefelter syndrome. So we see as fathers age, that time the abortions in the women also increase, and chances of giving birth to a boy with a Klinefelter syndrome also increase. That apart, let us look at the part in between the pars, that is in between the pseudo-autosomal region. That is called as a male-specific part of the Y chromosome. That can be divided into euchromatin, the pink color chart, and the heterochromatin, which is highly coiled, compacted, and it really, as on today, we know of no genes, active genes present in the heterochromatin. There are about 70 genes present in the euchromatin region or the male-specific Y euchromatin part of the Y chromosome. On the short arm, the YP, besides many other genes, is the most important gene called as the SRY gene. This SRY gene determines whether the bipotential gonad is going to become an ovary or it is going to become a testis. And what it does is it produces a protein which is responsible for maintaining and production of the Sertoli cells, which are the supporting cells of the germ cells. And it is the presence of SRY gene which makes the embryo a male. All embryos will become females unless there is a SRY gene. So, by chance, if the SRY gene just gets translocated on one of the X chromosomes, you will get a XX male. And supposing the SRY gene is absent on the Y chromosome, we will get a XY female. So all embryos become female unless there is a SRY gene. Now let us look at the YQ region. The YQ region has got some very important functions as far as the process of spermatogenesis is concerned. The AZFA region has got areas or genes which maintain the sperm germ cells in the fetal stage. When the embryo is, or when the fetus is in utero around the 5th, 6th month, there are some very important proteins produced by this AZFA gene which do not allow the destruction of the sperm germ cell. So when there is deletion in these important genes of AZFA region, we will get Sartoli cell only syndrome. There will be no sperm germ cells at all left in the testes. And so if we get a patient who has azoospermia and he has a deletion in the important region of AZFA, there is no point even in doing a micro TSA or any testicular sperm aspiration or anything. These men are straightway for a donor sperm. Then you come to the AZFB region. There is a lot of genetic information about these. There are not only one gene, there are many genes in this region, but the one responsible for meiosis during the formation of spermatogonia, there the sperm germ cell divides into primary spermatid, then secondary spermatid, and it undergoes meiosis. And these important steps which take place, the proteins required for these steps are, their genetic code is present in the AZFB region. And so in AZFB deletions, what is the picture of azoospermia? That is maturation arrest. So there are sperm germ cells, they are trying to become sperms, but they are not going ahead after the primary or the secondary spermatid level. Whereas the AZFC region is a region which is most commonly deleted. It is called as the ampliconic region of the long arm of the Y chromosome. That is, there are many repeats in this, and because of these repeats, they are more more likely to have genetic defects, because if the repeat number changes, there will be deletion in AZFC protein production. And AZFC function is also seen in some other autosomal genes like chromosome number 3. And therefore, patients with AZFC deletion may have severe oligospermia, or even if they have azoospermia, almost 50% of them will show some kind of spermatogenesis present in their testes, and we can get testes by micro TSA from that man. So we can advise micro TSA or an open testicular biopsy in patients who have AZFC deletion. But AZFA and B, absolutely there would be no point in doing their micro TSA or advising them ICSI. The best advice they would get is use of donor sperms. So in short, deletion in AZFA leads to Sartoli cell only syndrome. AZFB locus supports the growth and maturity of sperms and are considered as critical for efficient progression of sperm throughout meiosis. And AZFC region is comprised of repeated sequences and palindromes, and hence making it most vulnerable to deletions. A complete deletion in AZFC involves these are regions B2 by B4 region, which contains 12 genes and transcriptional units in the multiple copy numbers. And in most men with AZFC deletion, spermatogenesis is completed, but on a reduced scale, resulting in severe oligospermia. World over, the incidence of Y microdeletion and especially the AZFC deletion is shown, and in our country, in India, it is to the tune of 4 to 6%. It is seen to be highest in some areas like Moroccan population, then here in the Middle East, 10 to 13% in the Brazilian and the Chinese population, and 7 to 9% in the American and the Russian and Australian population. So many patients who come with azoospermia we would find the cause somewhere in the Y chromosome, in the Q arm, AZFA, B, and most commonly AZFC region. Well, now besides azoospermia, we can get men with oligospermia. We'll have sperms, plenty of sperms, but absolutely no motility. Or sperms with abnormal heads, abnormal tails, abnormal necks, or no acrosomic gap. So during spermatogenesis, what has been found is some genes are very important. For example, for the sperm germ cell to become a spermatogonium, the TAFB4B, this is the gene which is very active or functional here. So if this is defective, the sperm germ cell will not get converted to type A, type B spermatogonium. Then this spermatogonium undergoes meiosis. And in the different steps of meiosis, different genes are active. The SYCE1, the TEX11, which is a gene on the X chromosome, a very important gene. So genes on X chromosome also are responsible for men with azoospermia. So TEX1, TEX15, MCM8, all these genes are important in the steps of meiosis like synapses and the recombination. We know that is a very important thing which happens in meiosis is genetic recombination. That is, some part of this chromosome will go and will be exchanged with some part of the other chromosome, and this is a very important thing happening for producing diversity in nature. That is, I will not inherit the entire X chromosome from my father. It will be a mix, or any autosomal chromosome. It will be a mix between what my father is carrying from his father and mother. So this produces genetic heterogeneity, but it requires important proteins to control the mechanism. And when these genes responsible for production of these proteins are defective, we will get defective meiosis. Another important gene is the ZMY-ND15 gene, which is also responsible for meiosis 2, and which is important for conversion of histone to protamine. We know that the sperm head is small and it has to occupy, in that small space, all the 23 chromosomes have to be sitting. And so we have smaller proteins called as the protamines in the sperm head instead of the histones which are present in the normal cells. Now, there is one gene which has been recently discovered, which is responsible for abnormal chromosome passenger complex gene, that is called as. And during meiosis, half the chromosomes have to go to one side and the half have to go to the other side. And the gene responsible for this function is the AURC gene, AURC gene. If this gene is defective, we get sperms with very large irregular heads, and the sperms will not have haploid chromosomes, but they will have multiple copies of chromosome 2n, 3n, 4n, and therefore they may fail to fertilize or produce a proper embryo. So if we get a picture of this type of a teratospermia, it is important to know whether they have this AURC gene in them, a defective AURC gene. So the AURC gene is a member, AURC is a member of the Aurora family, subfamily. This is a serine threonine protein kinase. These are all enzymes, and all enzymes are produced by specific genes in our chromosomes. And these enzymes have very, very important functions. It has a very important regulatory function of mitotic events, including chromosome segregation and cytokinesis. It is essential. Its essential function is at the centromere in ensuring correct chromosome alignment and segregation, and is required for chromatin-induced microtubule stabilization and spindle assembly. Defects of the AURC protein lead to perturbation of meiosis and to production of chromosomally unbalanced gametes. So this was diagnosed just as early as 2015, and now many men with this type of teratospermia are being found to be AURC positive. It's also called as macrozoospermia. Now the sperm head has got an acrosomic cap, and there are two very important genes, that is the DPY19L2 and the SPATA16. These two genes are responsible for forming the acrosomic cap, which is responsible for entering the oocyte through the oocyte membrane, and also for the activation of the oocyte. Once the sperm enters the oocyte, it produces a calcium oscillation inside the oocyte, and this activation is responsible for the first meiotic division that takes place after fertilization. So sperms which do not have a acrosomic cap, we call them as globozoospermia, or sperms with round head. And these are because of a defect in the DPY19L2 or the SPATA16 gene. Similarly, the tail. We know that sperms have to have a very good motility in order to naturally fertilize a oocyte. But if there are some defects in these genes called as the CATSPER gene, which is responsible for the calcium channel entry and the fast movement of the acronemes or the fibrous sheath and the fibers inside the sperm tail. If this is defective, then the sperm tails cannot move as fast as they should, and majority of the sperm show very severe form of asthenospermia. Sometimes there may be defect in the tails. The tails may be thick, the tails may be short, the tails may be bent. And here we find this DNAH1 gene defect, where the peripheral pair of microtubules, the central microtubule, inner dynein arms, most of them are defective. So genes involved in asthenospermia, only 4 genes have been linked to asthenospermia through genetic analysis: CATSPER1, 2, SEP12, SLC26A8. It is to be mentioned that these are very rare because much of this diagnosis is based on a very small population that have been exposed to genetic tests. Now, sometimes the semen quality may be absolutely normal. Motility is good, sperms morphology is good, everything is good, count is nice, their survival is good, everything is fine. But after we do an IVF, we see that all the sperms, all the eggs are just lying like that, and not a single one is showing fertilization. Next, the couple, we say, okay, fine, next time let us do an ICSI. We do an ICSI and we see still there is a failed fertilization after actually putting a sperm inside the oocyte. So some genes were found, and one important gene found in this is the PLCZ1. This PLCZ1, that is called as phospholipase C zeta 1, is a member of a large family of enzymes able to bind to lipids in the membrane, where they hydrolyze specific phospholipids. Actually, what PLCZ1 does is when it enters the oocyte, it causes a calcium oscillation. And this calcium oscillation brings the male chromosomes in alignment with the female chromosomes, which is required for the first meiotic division. So when we have found many such patients, what we realized is if artificially we produce these calcium oscillations, can we really bring a change in these patients? So a new treatment has started for men diagnosed to be PLCZ1 defective genes, where they have continuously have had failed fertilization or failed division even after ICSI, is to put them in a media called as the calcium ionophore. And for a short time or 10 to 15 minutes after ICSI, the eggs are put in calcium ionophores, where a calcium oscillation is produced, and these eggs get fertilized and they produce good quality grade 1 blastocysts, and they have produced pregnancies with this type of a treatment. So this is a first treatment that we have for patients with a gene disorder where fertilization has failed, and with the help of certain chemicals we are able to bring about fertilization oscillations required inside the oocyte and formation of blastocysts and pregnancies. These are the inherited defects that we see in our genetic material of the sperms with defects. But there are a lot of acquired defects which we see in the semen, and this we call as DNA fragmentation index. We have already discussed long before that the sperms in the testes are never exposed to anything from the serum or blood of the man. So they have a very sterile environment. But the most dangerous place for the sperm is when it is stored in the epididymis for 2 to 3 days before the sperms are ejaculated. All the serum, whatever it contains, whatever chemicals, reactive oxygen species, everything hits the sperm membrane, which is a very weak phospholipid membrane. And when the membrane is damaged and there is double-stranded DNA break, that is the time when genetic material that we are trying to transfer in our eggs gets defective, leading to decreased fertilization, decreased sperm motility, failure of formation of blastocysts. And so many tests are now available, at least 3 or 4 tests, which try to tell us about the sperm uh, DNA fragmentation index. But in practical, we really don't have this at hand. There are many studies which are showing whether a simple Haas test, that is hypoosmotic swelling test, can really give us similar results as the DNA fragmentation index. And lots of papers are coming out about it. In our laboratory also, we do a simple Haas test in our patients. And if majority of the sperm tails do not show a coiling, that means probably there is a membrane defect and we cannot use those sperms for ICSI. And in such males, we can go to use a testicular sperm rather than an epididymal sperm and go ahead with the ICSI procedure. That is about DNA fragmentation. Many good laboratories have got good methods of doing a good DNA fragmentation. The cutout point is 20%. Of course, giving antioxidants, lifestyle changes, stop smoking, reduce toxic chemicals also can change DNA fragmentation index and improve the fertility of the couple. Why the sperm cells are highly vulnerable to this fragmentation is because they get oxidative stress due to several reasons. Because of the limited volume, the restricted distribution of cytoplasmic space, there is no cytoplasmic space at all. Where they can store their ROS, they do not have many metabolizing enzymes like catalase and glutathione peroxidase, resulting in significant lack of antioxidant protection. Moreover, sperm cells contain exceptionally high levels of polyunsaturated fatty acids in their plasma membrane, which are very susceptible to oxidative stress. When polyunsaturated fatty acids are attacked by free radicals, they generate lipid peroxidase and aldehydes, which have a direct inhibitory action on the sperm motility. So majority of the sperms with damaged DNA will have reduced motility. That is one advantage of doing a sperm wash and getting the highly motile sperms instead of the low motile sperms. So we discussed about the artificial oocyte activation in intracytoplasmic sperm injection. When repeatedly the sperms, even after injecting the sperm in the oocyte, we do not get any fertilization or division. We do not see 2PN, we just see the oocyte lying as it is. In these, we can do an artificial oocyte activation, that is artificially produce the calcium oscillation in the oocyte cytoplasm by using various techniques. Oocyte activation occurs early in the process of fertilization and involves a resorption of meiosis of the oocytes arrested at metaphase stage of meiosis II. The details of the mechanism are not clear, but transient increase in calcium ions inside the oocyte is known to play an important role. In ICSI-assisted fertilization, oocyte is activated by sperm-derived oocyte activation factor, also known as the sperm factor. After injection, a decrease in the activity of this factor is a possible cause of fertilization failure. So what are the things which we use for if we see patients with fertilization failure? Of course, we should find out whether they do have that PLCZ theta gene absent or defective. And calcium ionophore has been used for treatment of failed fertilization after ICSI. Besides that, electrostimulation, strontium, ethanol, puramycin, cyclohexamide, and many more will come. But commonly, as on today, what is used is the calcium ionophore. There is a specific protocol for its use. Those interested, I can always give you that protocol if you have such a patient with repeatedly failed fertilization after ICSI. So all clinicians who are treating infertile patients and they feel that the male has a cause, and on general examination, he has neither an infective parameter nor an endocrine parameter, and even after using his testicular sperms, we are not getting success, and we do feel that the cause is in the genetic material of the male, we must collaborate with genetic laboratories because they are progressing by leaps and bounds. But it is we who should supply them with the patients because we are directly in touch with the patients. They are only in touch with the samples that we are sending. So the more and more samples we send of oligo, astheno, teratospermic patients, the more will be the bioinformatics available to our geneticists and in our computers in order to help the further generations of infertile males. In many countries, they have formed some groups which only focus on male infertility, and they ask the clinicians that we would do your complete analysis. You only send us the patient's samples and the patient's blood samples so that their genetic evaluation they would do free as a part of their bioinformatic research. So nations are building their own bioinformatic uh, information, and it is this information which is going we are going to purchase tomorrow. So why not we form a collaboration with our geneticists and make our own information and use it for our patients at a much lower cost. So I hope I have cleared majority of the things. This is a science which is growing and which is going to grow very fast, and the speed depends on our collaboration with the geneticists. I open this. So we have no questions from the audience. Well, I would like to put a question to my audience. Anyone there?
Dr. Lakshmikant Shirsagar sir is here. Dr.
Yes.
Sujata Jadhav ma'am is here. Shilpa ma'am is here. So you can
Right.
ask. Yeah. सर 2 मिनट के लिए आ जाइए ना. ओके ठीक है जी. नो इशू नो.
So the question is that you have a patient with a report showing azoospermia. His serum FSH is 13 and his karyotype is normal. You have done a Y microdeletion and nothing is found. So what would you do next? Yeah, doctor. Whom should I say? Dr. Shilpa. I was constantly flashing one list of genes which have been diagnosed as on today as a cause of oligoacinoteratosis and azoospermia. So this list of genes is not in our routine armamentarium, but we can always send this patient for a whole exome. First, the list of genes responsible for non-obstructive azoospermia, and if they are negative, then a whole exome study. You have a patient with ORC gene positive report with multiple morphological abnormalities of the sperm head. So will you use his sperms, or what will you do for him? Will you use those sperms for ICSI?
Dr. Shilpa ma'am.
Yeah, Dr. Shilpa. The sperm heads are large, maybe double head. So because their meiosis is defective, majority of those sperms cannot be used. We cannot use these sperms even for ICSI because we'll get triploidy or something like that in our embryos. And can you use the sperms with the tail gene defect, the DANH1 defect, where there is only low motility? Can we use these sperms for ICSI and giving them a baby? We can definitely use these sperms, giving them an idea that the same gene can be transmitted to the next generation, but being a recessive gene, it will not express itself unless the wife also is a carrier of the similar gene. So ICSI can be done in these sperms with low motility. Even the CATSPER ones, ICSI can be done with CATSPER gene low motility. Supposing you do ICSI and there is failed fertilization, will you do a calcium inophore treatment, or you will do a genetic evaluation first? Anyone, doctor?
Dr. Shilpa ma'am, Lakshmikant sir, Neha ma'am, I'm making you co-host so you can unmute yourself.
Calcium inophore treatment has been tried in all patients with failed fertilization in many centers, and even if no genetic cause has been found, calcium inophore treatment becomes very successful. So they have been using it to a very great extent, and they say that the embryo quality produced after the calcium inophore treatment is really very good. Blastocyst rate is higher. They have actually compared with inophore and without inophore, and they found more blastocysts formed with calcium inophore as compared to without inophore in ICSI patients. So people may not do a genetic test, but still go ahead with calcium inophore treatment in failed fertilization patients. Overall, what I want to tell you is we should explain to all our couples who are doing IVF, ICSI, or even IUI, or whatever infertility treatment, that the entire function of this human genome, that is our software, is yet not known. And we really cannot give guarantee of any treatment. Like we may tell a patient to go in for an IVF, sperms look lovely, she's a PCO, there are many eggs, and we are expecting that, oh, now we are going to get a number of blastocysts, and that may just not happen because we are only playing with two cells. We do not know what software is inside it, whether it is corrupt, whether it has some defect in it, whether the correct proteins required for the production of a human beings will be produced by these chromosomes or DNA which come together. We really don't know. And this ignorance of ours should be known to the patient in order to prevent any misunderstanding. Many of the people outside feel that IVF is very mathematical. You give a sperm, you give an egg, and an embryo is produced and a baby is produced, which is not so. It is still not a mathematical science, and the main ignorance is our ignorance in the genetic compartment of our eggs and sperms. Yeah, I know this was a very a difficult topic because we all are not really exposed to the science of genetics. I think it is time we all IVF specialists now turn a little bit towards genetics so that we can do a little better every day.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you for a very interesting topic. And really, we are forwarding. Ma'am, Dr. Sneha ma'am is asking, is there any fellowship runs there?
Dr. Sneha, I don't have any fellowship or anything like that. But whatever is your problem, you are welcome. We can always discuss it out.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Good day, ma'am.
Okay.